So I'm going to talk today about what I call signature stories. And it's based on an article that'll be out in California Management Review in 2 weeks, which is entitled, What is Your Signature Story? It's written with my daughter. It's the first time she's ever written anything with me, and probably the last. It turns out she's very opinionated, actually. And so I have to really be extra sort of empathetic when I work with her. Everybody knows how powerful stories are. And so what we're trying to do is apply that to the strategic communication job. And let me start out with some examples of a strategic story. So the first story is a Nordstrom story. It was something like 1975 in the Fairbanks store. There was a salesperson there that had only been there a few weeks. And a customer came in with 2 worn snow tires and said, "These don't work so well anymore. Take my money back." And this clerk thought for a while, and then he decided to take the money. Gave him its $149 back. And it said that John Nordstrom was watching the process. And that really says so much about Nordstrom's, doesn't it? How many have heard that story? How is that possible? 30% of the audience has heard that story. How on earth could you have heard that story? Nordstrom's hasn't talked about it for the last 40 years or whatever. How many of those people heard the story because somebody told it to them? Almost everybody. Now think about it. Is that incredible? Here's this mythical, a lot of people think it's mythical, it's actually true, story, and it's exposed to a third of most audiences. 30 to 40% of most audiences heard that story. And that really gives you a feeling for the power of a story. And another one, Molson is a company that makes beer in Canada. And they're very into hockey because their customers are into hockey. I mean, their customers aren't fundamentally that interested in how you make beer, but they're really interested in hockey. So Molson, for a long time, has been connected with hockey. They've sponsored hockey venues, they've sponsored hockey teams and hockey players, and they've had a relationship with hockey. And then 3 years ago, they decided, let's build a hockey rink in the the way out in the mountain ranges of Canada where there's nothing for hundreds of miles. And they used helicopters, and they went in there, and in 2 weeks they built a professional hockey rink. And then they asked people to tell why they would do anything for hockey, why they were so passionate about hockey. Tell us your story. And they picked 11 of those people and flew them in there to play a hockey game. And that was their Anything for Hockey program. And it got enormous publicity, and it got enormous connection. People would sort of figure anybody that would do that really does share my passion for hockey. And then there's the Ella Bean story. Leon Bean in 1912 was a hunter, and he got tired of having wet feet when he got back from duck hunting. So he designed a boot that was leather, rubber in the bottom and leather on the top, stitched together, and it worked. And he was so excited about it, he decided to go in the business. He made 100 of them and sold them, and they leaked. So he had a tough decision, and he decided to take them back and give them their money back, even though he could ill afford to do that. Subsequently, he evolved the design, and it stopped leaking, became a bestseller, and today at Ella Bean, it's their bestseller, 110 years later. And that says a lot about the Boot and LL Bean. Then there's Blendtec. How many have seen the Will It Blend challenge? This guy, in 2008, started putting these ads where he described something like golf balls, silly putty, or an iPod, and it said, will it blend? And he put it in there, and it would blend. Yes, it blends at the end. The iPod one got 17 million views. Altogether, he's got 300 million views since 2008, and he spent nothing on media advertising, nothing. 300 million views. It's the most successful social media advertising campaign ever, for sure, by a big margin. And that became a signature story. It's sort of a set of stories that have the umbrella theme and tagline and spokesman, and that is a signature story. Let me give one more. This is a story that's relevant to a program, a branded program that Lifebuoy soap has. It started in India and it's spread out through the world. So can we play that video?
Ah! Push! Push!
Ayo tidur dulu, Tari. Biar besok bisa bangun pagi. Besok dia kan ulang tahun. Besok hari penting buatmu. Usiamu 5 tahun. Tiduran, ya, anakku.
So this particular video has 12 million views. They've got a companion one with 19 million views. And just think of the alternative ways to explain this program to a lot of people. The conventional ways, where you describe, sort of have a set of facts to describe this program, and just think about how that would work. Well, let me come back to the idea of a signature story. First of all, it's a narrative. That means it's not a list of facts. A lot of times when somebody will be asked, tell me the story of your company, they'll rattle off a set of facts. That's their story. Well, a signature story is a narrative. It's once upon a time. It's got a beginning and an end, and so forth. And it's got a lot of other powerful things. So it's not a set of facts. It's intriguing. That means it gets attention. Just because you have a narrative doesn't mean it's going to be worth listening to. So it gets attention, is authentic. It doesn't have to be literally true, but it can't precipitate the concept that this is phony, this is contrived, this is just selling me something. You can't get those images if it's authentic. It's got to be involving, draws people in. Psychologists call this transporting. You get transported into the story. And that's a powerful concept in the research and psychology field about stories. So it should be involving, and it should have a strategic message. So we all know to use stories in tactical things, just to communicate a point better, tell a story. But this is a strategic story, and so that means it's telling something strategic, of strategic importance. It might be a firm's values, its mission, its priorities, its strategy, but it's something more than just tactical, and it's something that clarifies, enhances, and inspires. And all these four things I put up were signature stories. So why do we do that? Well, one main audience is employees, because employees really need to have guidance about what they do, what's on brand, what's not on brand, and you know, you can put out all kinds of mechanisms, bullet points, and so on, but a story really gets you to feel, yeah, this feels like Nordstrom's. This is something that we should do here, and other things are things we should avoid. And it should inspire. Employees need an inspiration. They need a higher purpose, especially millennials. But it's no longer enough to say that, you know, let's increase sales, let's increase profits during the next year. It's not enough to do that anymore. And the best way to provide that guidance and that inspiration is through stories. Another target is customers, because customers want to know something about the offering, but they also want to know something about the organization. They want to know what are the organization values. They like to have a relationship with organizations they're comfortable with, if not proud of. And so a story can do that. If you think about the Molson story of building a rink, I mean, that tells you something about the organization's heart. It goes way beyond our beer is better than your beer. And if you look at the Lifebuoy case, for example, and that story really tells you something about the organization of Lifebuoy. Incidentally, one of the most impressive companies that I know is Unilever. Sometime you look at what the CEO of Unilever says that they do in the way of environmental programs and other programs, and why they do it. It's really extraordinary. And he doesn't do it because that's a way to get more profits. He does it because it's the right thing to do, and he's really amazing. But there's a lot of CEOs like that around. He's not that uncommon. But Unilever is, of course, the one that does the Duff Real Beauty stuff as well. But this Lifebuoy thing really fits into the Unilever portfolio. And there's another reason to do these signature stories, and that is the fact that a signature story not only defines what you do, but helps you determine who you are. I was working with a friend of mine who has a not-for-profit on developing a brand vision. And so what we did, we had an exercise where we first developed signature stories. And there was a lot of energy, a lot of stories and everything that came up. And then we said, okay, what's our brand vision? And the brand vision is informed by the signature stories. And they not only give them vocabulary, not only give them ideas, but they give them substance. Yeah, we really do this. And there's 2 or 3 stories to illustrate. Stories are powerful. If you compare stories to a set of facts, and you ask yourself, which are more memorable, which are more persuasive, and which are likely to be retold. I mean, if somebody told you, they spent X amount of millions or billions of dollars to make sure everybody knew that at Nordstrom's employees were empowered. And that wouldn't do nearly as well as planting the signature story that suddenly gets spread so that, 50 years later, 1/3 of the people know about it. That tells you that employees are empowered. Well, let's do a little test here. Here's a set of facts about the bean hunting shoe. Money-back guarantee. It's a waterproof rubber bottom boot for dry feet. Comfort of full grain leather. Steel shank adds support. Rubber chain tread bottom provides traction. Expert craftsman. Uniquely shaped foot form. Comfort and stability. So how many of those things do you think you can remember? 10 seconds later, to say nothing of next week or next month. How many of those are you going to remember? 2 or 3? And next month you'll remember none, probably. But in contrast, suppose we remind people of the L.L. Bean story. And just think what that's going to do. Is that going to be more memorable? Is that going to be more persuasive? Is that going to be more likely to be retold than these facts? Can you see somebody saying, did you know the L.L. Bean is made by expert craftsmen? What's the probability that story or that fact is going to be retold? Not very likely. But the L.L. Bean story is another matter. Actually, we know a lot about stories and persuasion. We know a lot about stories and communication too, and so forth, because there's been a lot of research done on stories. One writer talked about the most popular book in the mid-20th century, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And that writer argued that this story was a key to winning the Civil War for the North, because this story was spread all over England, and it made England politically incapable of entering the Civil War on the side of the Confederacy. And so the argument was that story was instrumental in the Civil War. One researcher in psychology reviewed 76 articles that contain about 140 studies, separate studies, that studied the impact of stories as compared to facts. And what they found was amazing, very consistent, big effects. Stories impact beliefs, attitudes, and behavior. Again and again, big impact, big effects. So this is 140 scientific studies that shows stories are, but you knew that. It's common sense, right? Stories are more effective. So why don't we use more stories? Why don't we develop more stories? And why don't we use them in strategic settings as well? So let's look at why that evidence has emerged. Why are they more persuasive? And I'll just give you 2 reasons. One is that they reduce counter-arguing. When you see a set of facts, your inclination is to say, yeah, but. Everybody says they got good craftsmanship. Steel shank, why should I care? Your competitor has rubber bottoms too. And so this counter-arguing is really insidious. It really undercut. I mean, this is after you break through the attention barrier, right? That's after you get attention, after you get somebody to process, which is not easy with that kind of content, right? But even if you do, they're going to counter-argue, and you're screwed. You don't counter-argue a story. I mean, it's just a story. There's nothing to argue against. Somebody's just told you a story. A second major factor is that the audience deduces the implication. The audience deduces that the employee is empowered at Nordstrom's. The audience deduces that if you, if you're a company in the L.L. Bean heritage story that's innovative, that has a passion for the outdoors, and that stands behind its products, that it'll probably make good products. And so you kind of deduce that for yourself. Nobody is telling you, we make good products. Now, how persuasive is that? But if they tell you the story and you deduce, I mean, this again, kind of duh. We know since the second grade, if somebody lectures at them, we certainly know it at the Haas School of Business. If somebody lectures at you, it's a tougher learning process than if you figure it out for yourselves. And that's why at the Haas School we've got all these mechanisms for people to discover it for themselves. All these group works, the whole entrepreneur program, and on and on. So stories persuade. So one of the reasons that even though people kind of know this, they don't run with it, it's not so easy. It's not so easy to find stories and to select the right ones and then to run with them. So in story sourcing, one thing that we know is there's all kinds of places stories can come from. We've already seen employees, the promotion at Molson, the founder at L.L. Bean, the offering as a hero at Blendtec, and the program at Lifebuoy, Help a Child Reach 5. And let me just give one more example, the hair story. A guy named Zhang in 1982 was a middle manager at a failing appliance company in inland China. And the company was literally, I mean, it was disgusting. There were rats, and it was awful. And it was going to go in the Chinese equivalent of bankruptcy then. So they made this middle manager, what do they got to lose? They made him CEO, and they said, good luck. And what Zhang did early in his tenure is a customer came in and said, I've got a washing machine that doesn't work. And Zhang said, no problem, let's go to the inventory and I'll get you another one that will work. He went to the inventory and he found that 20% of the appliances were defective, wouldn't work. So what Zhang did, he took those, something like 76 appliances, brought them to the factory store and got a sledgehammer and smashed them all to bits in front of everybody in the company. So that really, changed the whole culture of the company. And they turned around the quality, and then they started innovating. And today, that company is the largest manufacturer of appliances in the world, larger than Maytag and all the rest of them. It's the largest. And Zhang is still running it, and he is still sort of leveraging that story. So let me say a word about keeping stories alive. So you saw the Nordstrom story. It kept alive by itself. It's really an extraordinary thing. But how do you manage a story to keep it alive? Well, one is you extend the story. You kind of give it more texture. And like L.L. Bean has a lot of things that that talks about their passion and knowledge about the outdoors. And like something like 20 years after he invented the boot, he had these publications, and one of his quotes was, "Years of testing shows that 8 flies in 2 sizes are all you need. If salmon don't bite on these, call it a day." That's from Leon Bean. And so you have all this kind of reinforcing and providing texture and enlarging the story. And then you can use symbols. At Haier, there is outside the home office, there's a sledgehammer. That's the sledgehammer that destroyed those defective appliances. And at L.L. Bean, they have a big statue of the boot outside the home office, and they got a vehicle boot that that travels around. So you see that symbol, and you recall the story. You can have anniversaries, like Apple just had their 30th birthday party, and it was an excuse to sort of talk about the Mac and its heritage, an excuse to bring back the 1984 ad. And they had an iPhone. People took the iPhone, went around the world showing people how to use Apple products, and they created a video. And so that was a way to bring the stories back. And you can have internal programs. Like there's the Nordstrom's Way that reinforces that story. And the basics, the essence of the Nordstrom Way is that rule number 1 is you do anything that you can to satisfy the customer. There is no rule 2. That's it. And then it's underlined with specifics like don't point, walk, and rewarding exceptional service, and so on. So there's substance behind the story. So so that's what we have, a narrative. It's not a list of facts. Intriguing, authentic, involving, with a strategic message that clarifies, enhances, inspires to employees, customers, or those trying to create a vision. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and introduce another thought, and that is how can you use signature stories in your personal life or your professional life? You know, everybody is, knows that they ought to sit down, make time, sit down, and sort out their priorities and goals, what's meaningful to you. And it's hard to get beyond the to-do list of the day, isn't it? It's hard to go beyond doing the C-level activities, because it's such a good satisfaction when you get those done. So you put it off, right? And it's hard. Even if you spend a little time, it's hard. What are my priorities? You give up. And so one way to do that is to, instead of asking those tough questions, first ask, what's my signature story? And there's 2 kinds of signature stories. One, your personal one. It involves, your activities, your relationships, and so forth. And then there's a professional one. Where do I want to be professionally in 5 or 10 years? And how will I get there? And so forth. So I want you to figure out what's your signature story. And in a minute, I'll ask you to write it down or think about it. And if it's really good, to share it with others. But before I do that, I'll tell you what mine are. First of all, I wrote a book that literally nobody's read except a few of my kids on my life, from Fargo to the World of Brands. And in there are a lot of my signature stories in my personal life. Professionally, one of my signature stories comes from a question I'm asked a lot: how did I get into branding? And it started when I was involved in strategy. I started teaching a strategy course here and wrote a book, Strategic Market Management. How many took that course, strategy course? Probably was it the best course you ever took? Yeah. Well, what my learnings from that was, I wanted to learn about strategy, and I always go the inefficient route. I write a book and teach a course instead of reading a book and talking to people. But what I came to believe is that there's, people are too short-term oriented. And I sometimes speak disparaging of economists and finance guys as part of the problem. And I thought that what firms needed to do more of was to build assets instead of being preoccupied by short-term financials. And so this was in the mid-'80s, and I did a study of 248 firms, and I asked them essentially, what is your asset that you rely on? We got about 230 responses, and the interesting thing is number 1, number 3, and number 10 on the list were all brand equity elements. At the same time, brand equity was kind of emerging, and I recognized that my work in strategy, market research, and advertising sort of gave me, I was sort of halfway there at trying to work in branding. So as a result of that, I resolved then that I was going to really start focusing on helping firms build brand assets. And in doing so, this is a little presumptuous, which is really hard for me because I'm inherently a modest person. But I really want to change the way people looked at marketing and business. And that was 25 years ago. And so since then, I've done, most of my work has been in branding, written about 6 branding books, and I'm now in a branding company that was founded by 2 Cal students. And so anyway, that's one of my signature stories in my professional side. So I want you to think of a strategic story, but before I do, let me put another element to it. These stories don't have to be lengthy. In fact, you can write a story in 6 words. So I want you to come up with a 6-word story, and let me give you some examples. For sale, baby shoes, never used. Do you feel the emotion in that and the narrative that's implied? Now you have to use your imagination to create that narrative, but isn't that something? For sale, baby shoes, never used. How many have heard that before? Who wrote it? Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway once said that was the best story he ever wrote. I'll give you another one. Long for him, got him, shit. And you see the narrative around that, can't you? That was written by Margaret Atwood, a novelist. And I don't think she said it was her best story, but anyway, it had a lot of punch. So the story I told about how I got into branding in 6 words, life goal, fight short-termism, build brand assets. So that's a 6-word version of my signature story. So let's just take about 60 seconds, think about your signature story, and put it into 6 words. Okay, who's got a story that, there's one there that.
4th career, finally got it right.
What was the first part?
4th career.
That's terrific. That's terrific. And you did it in 5 words. There are actually 4-word stories and 5-word stories, so 6 is sort of verbose. Who else has got one? Yeah, here.
Transforming a population into a community.
Yeah.
Transforming a population for a community.
Into a community.
Into a community. Transforming a population into a community. That's got a lot of substance. Yes.
Making myself stronger by empowering others.
All right. Good. There's one up there.
Preserve the world environmentally for Amelia.
Say that again.
Preserve the world environmentally for Amelia.
For Amelia. All right.
Need talent? Call me, you win.
Money comes and goes, but time, a question mark.
Ah, good.
Social mission, innovate, bring others, execute.
Good.
Big brains, smaller than big hearts.
Big brains what?
Smaller than big hearts.
Ah, smaller than big hearts.
Good. Advocate for, disrupt, design, and deliver.
I have lost, found, and transformed.
Good. 4 words. That's
So I've got break things, fix things with smiles.
Isn't that amazing with the content you get in 6 words? Yeah?
Life real estate needs, wants investments.
Okay.
Inspire others, create life-changing results.
Age 3, Oakland, expelled from preschool.
Okay, do we have one more? Oh, one more down here.
A role model for others.
Okay, good. Isn't that really amazing? First of all, what you can do with 6 words, and second of all, how that gets you in to these tough questions. You know, what is my priority? And if you do a set of those signature stories, it's just a lot easier to address those really tough questions. So, so there you have it. I want you to see, come away with getting a feel for the power of stories and the complete ineffectualness of having lists of facts. In contrast, it's extraordinary. We're talking about orders of magnitude. Easier to get attention, to get stuff processed, to persuade, to get things passed on, if you have a story. And in the case of the signature story, we're looking for something that is intriguing, gets attention. We're looking for something that's authentic, doesn't come off as phony or sales effort. We're looking for something that's involving, that draws people in. And we're looking for a strategic message that's not just tactical, but talks about the values or the mission or the priorities or the strategy of the firm. And we're talking about something that not only will inform, but will inspire. And it'll get beyond attributes. It'll give you a picture of something about the firm. In the L.L. Bean case, we learn that the firm is passionate about the outdoors. We learn that the firm is innovative, that it stands behind its products. Now, if you have those list of attributes of the boot, you don't learn any of those things. Okay, good. So that's the end. Well, I'm open for Q&A on any topic. Is there any questions? Yeah.
On your signature stories, if your company, say, has multiple signature stories they could put out, you guys is great, by the way. I haven't really explored it yet. Is there a certain amount you think would be like enough? You don't want to go overboard, and yet you may want to have a few?
That's a great question. One of the problems for a lot of companies is to find a signature story that's worth investing in and leveraging. But a maybe more common problem is having too many signature stories. So like at Profit, our brand strategy firm, we now have 7 practice areas. You know, we have design, we have innovation, we have digital. I have a hard time even remembering them now. In addition to brand strategy and customer experience. So, and each of these practices have 3 or 4 or 5 different elements to them, right? And now, since the marketing group started to develop signature stories, well, just to have a signature story for 20 different subunits, that's 20 of them right there. And you get overwhelmed. And not only do you get overwhelmed as a user, but you get overwhelmed as somebody that's trying to use them to communicate. So one thing you can do is have a story bank, or it's sort of like a library of stories that's well suited. So if you need a story of a certain type, then you can find it, and you don't have to start over. Another thing you can do for customers or an audience is to prioritize stories. Like Skype has some wonderful stories about how Skype is used, and they categorize those into the for leisure and for work, for starters, and then they categorize them into the most looked at or something, so you can find a way to navigate a little bit, and so you're just not completely overwhelmed. But that's a big problem. Too many stories. Yeah.
In terms of getting the word out, the story, how important is video versus all the other media available?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that the digital world is turning to videos and away from print. But if, the more realistic and involving you can make it, the better, and videos are a way to do that. And you look at some of these videos that have gotten traction, like the Tree of Life video and the Blendtec videos. You couldn't do either of those with print or without videos. And audio isn't enough. So video is becoming really important. In fact, journalism is becoming important. After working with digital for such a long time, we now know, which we should have known at the beginning, that content is king. And so companies are hiring journalists. All these journalists that are losing their job at newspapers are going to work for companies and developing and communicating stories and figuring out a way to tell the story. And most of these companies now have videograph specialists that create videos. And it's amazing. I was just at Stanford yesterday creating a video to promote the California Management Review article, Signature Stories. And it's just amazing. They have these directors and cameramen and sets and they're not alone. I mean, a lot of major companies and so on, institutions will have the capability of really doing professional video work, and that's why. Yeah.
So all the examples you made were about consumer products or services. Any example of B2B, more or less unknown brands or services that can apply?
Yeah, I think that in branding in general, and therefore in signature stories in general, I think the B2B cases are the same as consumer cases usually. But in the case of B2B, what you usually have is a greater emphasis on the qualities of the values of the organization. Because in a B2B case, you're usually having a relationship with an organization. And the offering isn't as important as the organization for a lot of reasons. But so in a B2B case, you really want to know what are the organizational values in terms of their emphasis on quality, in terms of their ability to stand behind the customer and the ability to innovate. And those kind of organizational values become much more important than they do when you're selling yogurt or soda pop or something. So that's a big difference. But so in that sense, stories are even more important, because you can communicate the qualities of a yogurt or a soda pop, you know, with a list of facts, and you get by with that. But in a B2B case, you really need to be able to communicate the values of an organization. And you look at the success of the Haas School, and there's a lot of things Rich has done over the times that has unlocked the code, but creating and enunciating and getting substance behind these 4 values has been really important. And there's a lot of stories that have helped. You know, I'll give you an example. The Haas Business School decided to change the admission process. I mean, the admission process has been the same for 40 years, right? They changed the admission process and asked people to write essays, not on some abstract topic, but how these values are represented in their life. As a result of that, they've changed the profile of the people that are here as students. And so anyway, yeah, I think that in B2B cases, stories are even more useful. Yeah.
Just a follow-up question to that. So in terms of format to communicate that, we see customer testimonials usually in B2B. Have you seen any other more innovative ways to communicate that to your B2B customers?
No, but in terms of sources of stories, customer applications and customer experience is really an important source, and that's particularly true for the B2B case. So like the Prophet, these 20 signature stories we have, a lot of them are successful customer applications.
Yes, sometimes signature stories are writing themselves, and you might not have wanted to actually sign on those. And I was wondering if Prophet had any division that was dealing with those stories that are signing your name that you don't want, in fact.
Oh, oh, I see. So this,
I'm Volkswagen, for example.
Oh, you mean, for example, Walmart does not want to hear stories about how their employees are having to go to the food bank, things like that. Yeah. Yeah, stories are powerful. Stories can go viral. And if you're United Airlines and you destroyed a guitar and somebody found out about it, that's just enormously costly. So the question is, how can you avoid that in the digital world? And there's been a lot of effort to try to deal with that question, and there is no easy answer. I think the best thing to do is to be lucky. And the next thing is to have a system that calls these blunders to the surface immediately, and have a system that responds to it right away. Because almost all these things you can respond to if you catch it, nip it in the bud, before it gets legs. That was certainly true with this guitar case at United Airlines. And another thing you can do, in the case of Walmart, which got a lot of these negative stories, right? So about 6 or 7 years ago, one of the Walmarts was on a hunting trip with an environmentalist friend who said, why don't you do something about this pristine world of ours and help? And so Walmart embarked on an amazingly aggressive environmental program. It's without doubt the one that had more impact than any other private program. And so Walmart really, by doing that, and the story that lies behind it, can change the conversation. So when you think about Walmart, you don't necessarily think about one of these employee stories, you think about the environmental story. And they've really changed the conversation. And somebody wrote an article last year saying it's hard to hate Walmart anymore. So by stuffing down the bad story is one thing, but building up alternative stories is another.
If you're a small brand and you have great stories, is the approach to just push them out with a media plan and to aggressively try to distribute it? Or should the approach be to just get it out in a small way and hope that customers, stakeholders, partners pick it up and retell it? Because the beauty of the story is when it comes off as being authentic, but being authentic is what you lose if you've got a big marketing push behind it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And one way to state it is how do you get a story to go viral? And it takes a lot of luck. And I blog. Now, I blog once. I blogged 270 times. And I've had blogs that have had 30,000 views, and several in the 20s, and a lot of them in the, under 2,000, even under 1,000. So what's the difference? And there's a lot of luck to it, because if you catch the eye of somebody that can push it, in my case, I blogged on LinkedIn sometimes, and if the LinkedIn editors decide to push it, it goes way up in the 20s, and if they don't, it's way down. And so I've been spending a lot of time how to manipulate them to like my stuff. But they're the ultimate gatekeepers and influencers. You need to be lucky, but also if you're really intriguing and you have a story that people will catch people's eye, it's a lot better chance that they will do it. So if you just write a story that you want to go viral, it probably won't. But if you write a story that's really something that will get people to talk about, then you have a better chance. It doesn't mean it'll happen. But you can use some, one thing people do, there's a whole book out on this, and how you use employees to help you push stuff. So most employees have their own social network, and if you have a story that your organization wants to tell, if all these employees put it on Twitter and Facebook, then you're going to have a lift to begin with.
Hello. I'm coming from Venezuela. Perhaps this will help frame my question. Can a brand, which is initially your story is your asset, become also a prison?
A what?
Or can a prison, your own prison as a company, if you have to leave the country, or if you're pushed to change the story? Because many things in Venezuela currently are very much connected to the place. The chocolates we produce are produced there. The rums, many of our products are very much the products and the companies which are based locally. Let's say a wine or a rum or a chocolate. If these companies have to move out, what happens with your story? You're no longer in a hacienda in Venezuela. Are there any examples of companies that have had to change their initial story or to evolve it, that have done it in a good way instead of losing value?
Uh-huh. Who can answer that question? Has anybody got an example of a company that whose brand equity is based in part on a locale, and then they moved, and so. Facebook?
Bacardi rum.
Bacardi rum? Bacardi rum went from Cuba to... It's you know, more generally, it's a problem. If you have a brand that's well-defined among any attribute, it doesn't have to be location, but if it's well-defined about maybe a benefit or a personality or something, and you lose that, you know, like Subway's spokesman got convicted of child molestation, and then what you do? Sometimes, I'm thinking of Hidden Valley Ranch dressing, where there's no hidden valley. It's just a mythical thing so that it can go anywhere. So the issue there is to connect whatever it is to some programs and other symbols so that when you lose that fundamental point, you still have this larger you know, sort of texture around it. Okay, it's at 12:30. We're supposed to stop. So I think I should stop. Thanks all for coming.